Evan walked in like he always did. No knock, just a turn of the handle and the thud of boots on the mat. I was drying dishes the same way I had for years. Quietly, without much thought. The winter light hit the kitchen tiles just right, soft and low, like it wanted to leave me in peace. He didn't even sit down. Just placed a printed sheet on the counter next to the teapot. Mel's family is coming for Christmas, 15 total. Gluten-free for her sister, no dairy for her mom. Oh, and her dad doesn't like cats, so keep Mango in your room. That was it. I stood there, dish towel in hand, unsure if I'd misheard. But Evan was already scrolling through his phone, his mouth moving, as he read texts I wasn't meant to see. No. Would that work for you, Mom? No. Do you need help with the prep? Just instructions. Like I was the innkeeper of some family lodge and the guests had already paid. I looked at the list. Food allergies, bedding assignments, arrival times. Someone had planned this in great detail. Someone who wasn't me. Evan, I said quietly. You're telling me this now. He glanced up. Yeah, I meant to mention it earlier. Melanie's just trying to make sure everyone's comfortable. I folded the towel and placed it on the counter. My hands moved without my permission, neat, practiced calm. And yet inside, something had shifted, not snapped. Just slid out of place. It wasn't the list. It wasn't even the tone. It was the fact that somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being asked, stopped being considered. I was the default, the given, the background to their holidays. Evan was already halfway to the door. We'll bring dessert, he added, like that would balance the rest. Then he was gone, just like that. And I stood alone in my own kitchen, holding silence in my palm, like a cracked plate. I turned and reached for my planner. I sat at the kitchen table the next morning, the list still there, weighted down by the sugar jar, like it might blow away and take the obligation with it. My tea had gone cold, while I reread each bullet point. Beneath the meal preferences, Melanie had added a line in her loopy cursive. If you could deep clean the bathroom before they arrive, that would be amazing. Attached to the email were Pinterest images, twinkling lights over fireplaces, napkin folds shaped like stars, 3-tiered trays of color-coordinated cookies. She had sent them like suggestions, but the message was clear. This wasn't just a visit. It was a production. And I was the crew. An hour later, a message came through. Melanie, is the guest room decent enough for my parents? They're a little particular with smells and linens. I didn't reply right away. I looked over at the door to the guest room, a space I had painted myself with curtains I hemmed by hand. It had been good enough for my sister, good enough for Evan when he and Melanie were between leases, but now it needed vetting. That evening, Evan's voice drifted down the hall. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but our walls aren't thick, and his voice wasn't quiet. Yeah, he laughed into the phone. Mom loves hosting. She's retired. She's got nothing else going on. I stopped drying the last plate. Nothing else going on. I folded the towel slow and precise, smoothing the edges before setting it on the counter. My feet found their way to the porch without me deciding. The air was crisp still. From here, the windows glowed warm with the lights I'd hung last week, the same ones Evan and I used to unravel together while eating cookies straight from the cooling rack. Somewhere between then and now, things had shifted. I couldn't pinpoint the moment I'd been reassigned. No longer a mother, but a manager of linens and meals. Not a host, just housing. I sat on the porch bench and pulled my coat tighter. Then I got up and went inside to check the pantry. The pantry shelves were full. Rice beans, flour sugar, cans lined up like soldiers. It wasn't new. I'd always kept it stocked, partly from habit, partly from those long winters when Evan was small and the roads iced over before noon. I used to cook 3 meals a day with barely a word of thanks. But back then, the silence felt like love. I remembered borrowing 2 space heaters from the neighbors, when our furnace gave out during a cold snap. I slept in the hallway just to make sure his room stayed warm. He never knew that part. He just knew he didn't wake up cold. I wasn't looking for credit. But I wasn't expecting to be forgotten either. A message popped up while I was sorting the spice jars. Melanie's mom. I prefer dry reds, nothing too acidic. Just glad Corinne has the time to make the real Christmas happen. Real Christmas. I read it twice. The phrasing wasn't accidental. I wasn't the guest. I was the event planner. I didn't respond. I just turned the phone face down and sat at the edge of the kitchen stool, pressing my hands to my thighs. When Evan stopped by that afternoon to drop off an extra folding chair, I thought maybe he'd offer something an apology, a gesture of thank you. Instead, he glanced at the grocery list I'd started and said, "You're amazing, Mom. I don't know how you pull this off." He didn't stay long. Said they had dinner with Melanie's aunt and her husband. Then he was out the door again, his shoes leaving faint trails of melted snow on the entry rug. I swept them up after he left. It felt like sweeping up what was left of the version of me they still wanted around. Later that night, I looked at the calendar pinned to the fridge and circled the 23rd. A quiet circle drawn with a pencil. Nothing dramatic, just a mark. Then I pulled the suitcase down from the top shelf of the closet. The next morning, I opened my laptop and stared at the airline website for a long time. The cursor blinked beside the words "Redeem Travel Points." I hadn't used them in years. Evan and Melanie always said traveling alone was too much trouble. But the points were still there, quietly waiting. Hendersonville came to mind. A small cabin just beyond the trees, close enough for comfort, but far enough that no one could drop by. I scrolled through photos, a porch swing, a small fireplace, shelves of books someone else had left behind. No decorations, no noise. It looked like silence could live there. I booked it for the 23rd. No return date yet. That afternoon I stopped by the post office. Melanie's order had arrived last week, embroidered stockings with each person's name stitched in gold. I had almost sent them back when she'd forwarded the receipt to me by mistake, but I didn't. Now I sealed the box, taped the address label, and handed it across the counter. The clerk smiled and said, "All set for Christmas." I smiled back. Something like that. Back home, the kitchen list was still on the counter edges, curling from the heat vent. I read through it once more. The handwriting looked foreign now. I tore the sheet neatly in half and dropped it into the recycling bin. That night, I stood in the guest room doorway, staring at the bedspread I'd ironed last week. Melanie's parents would have liked it simple, clean, neutral. I straightened one pillow out of habit, then stopped mid-motion. My hands hovered, then fell. No one would notice if I didn't make the bed. By the time I zipped my suitcase, it was close to midnight. The air felt heavy, but not unpleasant, like something final had already been decided. I unplugged the house phone, locked the back door, and left the porch light on. In the morning, I'd start the drive toward the mountains, toward the quiet that no one could demand from me. By the time I reached the cabin, the air smelled like rain waiting to happen. I unlocked the door, turned on the small lamp near the window, and stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me. There was no list on the counter here, no voices moving through the walls. Just space. I made coffee and sat by the window. The trees outside were still thin against the gray sky. My phone buzzed once, twice, then kept going. I didn't pick it up. When I finally turned it over, the missed calls stretched down the screen. Evan twice from Melanie, and one from a number I didn't recognize. I took another sip of coffee before pressing play on the voicemail. "Mom, where are you?" "Everyone's arriving Friday. The fridge is empty. Did you forget Melanie's parents are on the road already?" His voice sounded tight, caught somewhere between irritation and panic. I deleted the message without replaying it. I poured another cup of coffee and wrapped my hands around it. The window pane trembled slightly with the wind, the branches outside shifting just enough to remind me how far I'd come. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't teaching anyone a lesson. I had simply stepped out of the role they wrote for me. The phone lit up again, and this time I powered it off completely. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of something steadier, heavier, real. Outside, the first drop of rain hit the window. I leaned back in the chair, watching it slide down the glass. Somewhere, a family was realizing the house they'd planned to use wasn't theirs to enter anymore, and for the first time in years, I felt no need to explain why. It was past 7 when I finally turned my phone back on. No voicemails now, just texts stacking on top of each other. Evan, Melanie, then a short one from Melanie's sister. I didn't open any of them right away. I wasn't in a rush to step back into that current. I made dinner slowly. A baked potato, steamed broccoli, a piece of grilled fish. No centerpiece, no timing, no 15 people hovering. I ate at the small table by the window, the dark pressing gently against the glass. When I finished, I rinsed my plate and sat with my tablet, not intending to scroll, just needing something quiet to do. But the images came anyway. Melanie's sister had posted a photo. A dining table cluttered with paper takeout bags and mismatched napkins. A crumpled receipt in the corner of the frame. The caption read, "Holiday Chaos. Love this crew." There were no candles, no cloth napkins, no glazed ham or wine glasses, just plastic forks and a half-empty soda bottle tipping over near the centerpiece someone forgot to set. She didn't tag me. Of course not. Why would she? I hadn't made the table this year. I hadn't plated anything, folded. Anything stood at the stove from morning till dusk. My name wasn't attached to this version of Christmas, and for once, neither were my hands. Another message from Evan lit the screen. "You could have told me." I stared at it longer than I expected to. Then I typed back simply, "You never asked." I didn't send anything else. I didn't ask how dinner went or if they found the spare set of sheets. I didn't ask if the cat was still hiding in the attic or if anyone noticed the draft in the hallway. Those were things I used to manage without being told. Outside, snow started to gather in the cracks between the porch slats. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and leaned into the quiet. My phone stayed still after that. No replies, no follow-ups. Just me, the cold window, and a kind of stillness I didn't know I'd missed. The cabin had a guest book tucked between the fireplace logs and a basket of worn blankets. I found it while looking for matches. The pages were soft, the ink from old pens bleeding slightly at the edges. Most messages were short. "Lovely stay," or "We'll be back next fall." Some left names, a few drew hearts or pine trees in the margins. But one entry near the middle stopped me. "Sometimes peace is what you buy with the ticket out." No name, no date. Just that sentence written in firm, looping script. I reread it twice, then closed the book gently and set it back where I found it. Dinner was quiet again. A bowl of soup and buttered bread, nothing dressed up. I ate slowly, letting the silence stretch out around me. There were no interruptions, no forks scraping plates, no doors slamming upstairs. Just the fire cracking low and the faint creak of the wood settling. After washing up, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my phone again. Messages blinked. One photo from Evan, him and Melanie smiling tight at the dinner table. Her makeup was perfect. His shirt was wrinkled. The caption read, "Making the best of it." Not the same without some people here. I didn't believe the sentiment. Not really. It was a line written for others to see, not for me to feel. I opened the family group chat. For a moment, I hovered, thumb paused over the option to leave. But I didn't. I simply muted it. Then I archived the thread and closed the app. There was nothing left to say in that space. No point in watching a conversation I was no longer part of. I pulled the blanket over my legs and reached for the book I'd brought with me. Outside, the wind had picked up brushing against the window like a soft knock that didn't need to be answered. Tomorrow, I'd meet the cabin owner for tea. And maybe I'd ask her how long she'd been choosing peace, too. Billy met me on the porch just after 10, a wool scarf wrapped tight around her neck and a mug in her hand. She smiled like we'd known each other for years. There was no small talk, no paperwork, just tea, and the quiet understanding that comes from having lived through enough Decembers to know what matters. We sat in the sunroom windows, fogged at the edges, our cups steaming between us. She asked if I was enjoying the cabin, and I told her the truth. That it was the first time in years I'd felt like the holidays belonged to me again. She nodded and said, "The first time I said no to my daughter, she didn't speak to me for a month. But I slept better every night." I smiled. We didn't need to explain ourselves beyond that. We talked about the hiking trail nearby, how quiet it stayed even in peak seasons. Billy told me about the time a bird nested in the mailbox, and she let the letters pile up for weeks just to avoid disturbing it. There was something steady in her voice. Not bitterness, not regret, just calm. A woman who'd once stepped off the same ledge I was towing now. When she stood to leave, I asked if the cabin was available in April. Her eyes crinkled with amusement. "Already planning your escape just in case I said." She handed me a handwritten receipt and said she'd block the week off. I folded it carefully into my wallet, not because I needed the reminder, but because I liked the feel of something quiet being chosen, just for me. After she left, I packed my scarf and walked a slow loop around the trail behind the cabin. The trees were bare, the path soft with damp leaves. Every step felt like a decision I didn't need to justify. When I returned, I placed the kettle back on the stove and pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a new voicemail. I didn't check it right away. Instead, I opened the guest book again. The voicemail began before I could brace for it. "Mom, it was chaos. Everything was a mess. Mel's parents were awful. I didn't know what to do." His voice cracked halfway through, not from sadness, but from the strain of trying to hold everything together. I let it play, once the words spilling into the quiet of the cabin, then pressed delete. Not out of anger, just completion. There wasn't a single thing in his message that required my response. They had chosen their version of Christmas, and I had chosen mine. Later that morning, I opened my notebook and made a small list of things waiting back home. Laundry mail, the faint hum of the refrigerator. None of them felt urgent. The house would be fine without me. It always had been. When I did finally drive back 2 days after Christmas, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Stale pine and something sour like old fruit left in a bowl too long. The trash bins outside were full. The dining table half cleared. Wine stains, a few unwashed glasses, and plates stacked carelessly in the sink. They hadn't bothered to run the dishwasher. The towels in the guest bathroom were still folded exactly the way I'd left them, untouched and stiff. The bedsheets hadn't been changed. It looked as though the whole house had been used and abandoned in the same breath. I moved through the rooms slowly, my hands at my sides, resisting the familiar urge to tidy. Each mess whispered the same thing: you were never the problem. I gathered their leftover mail, dropped it in a small basket, and set it by the door. Then I made myself tea and sat in my chair by the window, the one facing the small patch of woods. No gifts had arrived. No card, no apology. Not even a text pretending everything was fine. The silence that followed didn't sting this time. It settled like air finally stilling after a long storm. When I turned off the light that night, I knew I wouldn't wait for them to call again. The days turned quiet again, the kind of quiet that didn't demand anything. I filled them with books, long walks, and meals made for one. The rhythm suited me. I heard nothing. For a while, no calls, no surprise visits. Just a few forwarded emails from the family group thread I no longer opened. When the calendar flipped into a new year, I marked it only by flipping the page. No resolutions. No expectations. Then one afternoon, Evan's name lit up my phone. Just a text. Next year, maybe we can do something smaller. Just us. There was no apology. No mention of the mess. Just a softened rewrite of a holiday already spent. I read it once, then set the phone down and didn't respond. It wasn't spite. I wasn't angry. Just done. The idea of next year didn't move me anymore. Not the way it used to. I didn't want a smaller version of the same pattern. I didn't want a carefully curated apology in the form of a simplified guest list. Instead, I opened my laptop and searched train routes to the coast. I found one that ran straight through the mountains and down toward the shoreline. A small town where the winter waves crashed loud and the sidewalks stayed empty through February. I booked the trip that night. A window seat early departure. Enough time to walk along the beach before the cold set in. The suitcase was already where I'd left it, still tucked behind the closet door. I packed light. I'd learned what I didn't need to carry anymore. As I zipped it closed, I paused at the threshold of my bedroom. The same room Evan had once cried in as a child curled against my shoulder during thunder. He had found comfort in my presence. I had offered it freely. But comfort given without pause becomes expectation. This time, I would offer it only to myself. I turned off the bedroom light, then the hall. One by one, the house dimmed behind me as I stepped out into the waiting dusk.